The funding for this program is provided by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting and the Friends of 4, 10, and 12.
Good evening. It's been just over a month now since a special citizens committee released its report on the operations of the State Youth Services Center at St. Anthony. That's the Idaho Reform School. The report, of course, as you might remember, recommended a number of changes that were endorsed by the Idaho Department of Health and Welfare. But the findings in that report were quickly criticized by the Youth Law Center, a San Francisco-based public interest law firm. The Law Center charged in August that the Citizens Committee report was incomplete, that a more far-reaching study of the St. Anthony facility was needed. Today, the State Department of Health and Welfare and a lawyer for the Youth Services Center, or the Youth Law Center, I should say, discussed their differences. And tonight, Elizabeth Jameson of the Law Center and Health and Welfare Director Rose Bowman will join us for a follow-up conversation on the controversy at St. Anthony. We'll be talking with both of them in a moment. As part of that Citizens Committee study done earlier this year, the Department of Health and Welfare hired 3 independent consultants to evaluate the operation of the St. Anthony facility. Earlier today, I talked with 2 of them about their findings. James McDonald, a professor of law at the University of Idaho in Moscow, who joined us in Moscow, and Orlando Martinez, director of youth services for the state of Colorado, who joined us from the Rocky Mountain Public Broadcast Center in Denver. Mr. Martinez, let me begin with you. Can you give me just briefly your impressions of the Idaho Youth Services Center and how good or how bad a place it is?
Well, the center itself, when I first arrived, gave me one of the impression of being one of those correctional facilities that we've tended to have, particularly in the Southwest, located out in the rural areas, out of sight, out of mind. The facility was well maintained from all external appearances, but the buildings are quite old. Which led me to believe that, if anything, that there had been some inattention to the physical structure of the facility. The staff itself, I was rather impressed with, in that you had a new core of young people coming in and an older core that had been there for some time, and there seemed to be some tension in that. Generally, my impression was of a facility which needed a great deal of attention and had not been getting it over the last few years.
Let me ask you about each of you, Professor McDonald. How complete was the study that you conducted there?
Well, I can't speak for the others, of course. I was on site for 2.5 days, interviewed staff, interviewed students, interviewed administration, viewed the entire physical plant, spent several weeks researching and preparing a written report. My written report was 30-some pages. I think I was complete.
And the purpose, again, of your report was to basically look at the legal situation.
Yes, I was focusing primarily on potential constitutional problems, to a lesser extent some existing statutory problems.
Mr. Martinez, you said in your report that there needed to be a good deal more done than you were able to do, right?
Yes, one of the things that occurred when Mr. Lynn Lund and I were at the facility in June was that we did not complete the detailed, comprehensive investigation or evaluation of the program itself. We found that we needed to focus, rather than on that specific detail, on more of the broad administrative management issues that existed not only in the facility, but also what appeared to be occurring on the departmental level.
And you said in your report, if I can quote back to you something you wrote a few months ago, you said that there did not appear to be a clear articulation of the purpose of the Youth Services Center. What did you mean by that?
Well, I think what's happened, just by virtue of the name of youth service, they tend to be, or programs like that tend to be all things to all people. As a result, you get a mix of clientele, like maybe a severe, serious juvenile offender, and then ranges to the less severe, maybe even to the status offender type of youngster being placed there. By its nature, this kind of a program tends to accept all kids. It does not reject, nor does it appear to have the authority to be able to do so. So as a result, when you cannot exclude certain kinds of population being placed with you, you tend to get a real unusual mix, and this is what appears to be occurring at St. Anthony.
You also strongly encourage the Department of Health and Welfare to do follow-up studies, including bringing in the Youth Law Center, the group from San Francisco, right?
Yes. What I suggested very strongly was that they include the Youth Law Center out of San Francisco. I felt that that would be able to give some legitimation to any further studies that were conducted at the facility. Additionally, I recommended that be a comprehensive study conducted at the facility, one that was more detailed than what Mr. Lund and I were able to do, and one that would look at current practices and to look at the program in total. The reason for that is, and let me give you an example, the practice of sitting chair or sitting wall, if you discontinue that, you seem to have an effect somewhere else, for example, like the overuse of isolation. So you need to have a way to manage youth behavior, and if you don't go in and take a look at the total program, your effect in clearing up one problem may be in creating another.
But yet the department apparently has no inclination to do that, and they have, to this point at least, not invited the Youth Law Center really to participate in any ongoing study of this facility. Does that disappoint you?
I am not aware of what the department plans. I have not been told. If that be the case, I think that it would be an unwise move.
There's a good deal of controversy about the Youth Law Center here in Idaho, about some of the charges they've made. You've had some experience with them in Colorado. How credible a group are they?
Well, actually, we've had quite a bit of experience with the Youth Law Center. We've undergone litigation with the Youth Law Center. We just entered into a settlement agreement as a result of a lawsuit in one of our rural jails on the Western Slope. Additionally, they've worked with us in our long-term treatment institutions in developing a more acceptable policy on the use of restraints. So we've had a number of contacts with them. I found them to be very much in the advocacy role and seem to be more intent in trying to achieve the same goals that we are, basically. It's very uncomfortable to be having the legal profession looking over your shoulder. However, I think in the long run it's been beneficial in this state.
Okay, let me go back to Professor McDonald in Moscow. You looked at the legal issues as we mentioned earlier. Let me quote back to you a couple of lines from your report. You wrote at one point that the judicial system and the department, meaning the Department of Health and Welfare, need to, quote, be hit over the head with the concept of the least restrictive alternative in handling these juveniles. What did you mean by that?
Well, this all relates back to the mixture of different kids type of problem that Orlando mentioned. There is developing a body of law that people in general, specifically here children who need treatment as opposed to incarceration, may have, and this is still developing, a constitutional right to that treatment. And what we've done here, and again I think it's a lack of budgeting facilities, is use the Youth Services Center, Orlando mentioned this, as sort of a catch-all. We've got there children with sociopathic problems, young criminals, and the facility was designed and built and I think does a good job with those type of children. Unfortunately, again, a funding problem in Idaho, we also have children there with emotional problems. We have children there with drug, alcohol, and related problems. And mixing these children up in an incarceration environment without providing adequate treatment for those who need it may be a technical constitutional violation. I think the legislature is going to have to fund alternative environments, alternative treatments for those who need them.
So there is the danger of some significant legal liability on the part of the state existing today at the Youth Services Center.
Yes, certainly. There have been federal courts in other parts of the country who have closed such facilities or who have transferred certain children out of such facilities. And those types of dangers, again, with the possible related danger of civil liability, are indeed possible.
Mr. Martinez, you don't have the legal background that Professor McDonald does, I assume, but would you care to comment on that? Did you see some reason to be concerned about the legal liability of the state of Idaho?
Very much so. One of the areas deals with the classification. Again, because of the nature of that facility and the nature of most of these facilities, it being the catch-all, there did not exist, at least from what I could determine, a very clear classification system again, based on that least restrictive idea. And there are other areas, I think. I mean, one is just the environment itself. The facility itself needs major renovations, or at least replacement, and staffing patterns do not seem to be those of the type that I would think would be necessary to deal with youth in confinement like this. So there were a number of areas. One other very important area was the lack of education. In one particular unit that I visited and had an opportunity to discuss the educational program with a staff person, there was very limited education being provided.
Professor McDonald suggests that this is really a money problem. Is it a money problem, or is it also, as others would suggest, an attitude problem, if you will, and the whole approach to how the facility is operated?
Well, I agree with Professor McDonald that it will be a money problem. I'm suggesting that first we need to define in Idaho what the purpose of the youth services system is. I think we need to develop a much more clear youth policy in that state. How does Idaho wish to handle its youth in conflict? And then I think from that you could start developing the resources, or appropriating the resources to meet those kinds of goals.
Professor McDonald?
Well, I think that it is a money problem is indicated by another related problem we have in Idaho, and that is that the department apparently has been billing certain parents for so-called services that are provided at the Youth Services Center, and that creates another legal problem. It's one thing to bill parents for treatment-type services that are provided to their children. It's another thing to attempt to bill them when, in reality, what you're talking about is incarceration. And again, I think the department's efforts to have the parents pick up some of the bill for what's going on out there is just indicative, again, of the problem that will be faced in January, when I hope the department will go before the legislature and get money to set up alternative facilities, improve foster care programs, local in-community programs, and the like.
So I take it you would not believe at this point that enough has been done to control or avoid the legal liabilities?
No, I don't think they've been identified. I'm not sure that the department, let alone the legislature, have been aware of the legal problems of not having a number of alternative facilities for different types of children with different types of problems.
Well, the last time we talked to the department on this program, they said that essentially things were under control, that the bad practices had been corrected. Not true?
Well, I think if by bad practices you mean actual physical maltreatment of children, I think that has been corrected. Orlando mentioned sitting wall, standing chair, some of the punitive measures that have been used out at the facility. I think that those measures are certainly not the cutting edge of therapeutic philosophy. Technically, they're not a cruel and unusual punishment type of legal violations. The people I saw out at the center were no longer maltreating children, but that's certainly a different matter than whether there's adequate funding and adequate alternative facilities. I believe there are not.
Mr. Martinez, should we believe the Department of Health and Welfare when they tell us that things are under control there now, and we shouldn't be too concerned about the way things are progressing?
I would like to believe that, because I believe people in my profession would want to do the best thing. But I'm not the one they have to convince. I think there are people like the Law Center, people who need to have more assurances that the practices have been discontinued and that in fact they would not reoccur. To me, if the administration at the agency said we've quit doing these, quote, bad things, I would want to believe them.
Mr. Professor McDonald in Moscow, we thank you for being with us tonight.
Thank you.
We appreciate it. And Mr. Martinez in Denver, thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Those interviews were videotaped earlier today. Now let's turn to the views of the director of Idaho's Department of Health and Welfare, Rose Bowman, and Elizabeth Jameson, a staff attorney for the San Francisco-based Youth Law Center. Let me begin with you, Ms. Bowman. The Youth Law Center and the department have been painted as something of antagonists, adversaries. What was the purpose of your getting together today?
I think that we were trying to clear up our communications problem. I see that we have some things that we can provide to the Youth Law Center that they have asked for, that we're willing to provide. And I think that the meeting today, which by the way is not over yet, we're in the middle of it still, is helping to clear up some of the communications problems that we've had.
Well, we thank you for breaking into your meeting to come and talk with us. Ms. Jameson, you make some progress today? Answer some questions?
Hopefully we've made some progress. Our main concern at the meeting today was to urge the Department of Health and Welfare to adopt the recommendations of the Citizens Committee's experts. Mr. Martinez and Mr. Lund specifically recommended that a complete, thorough evaluation be made of practices at the Youth Services Center. And we have not had a commitment from the department that they would adopt those recommendations.
That's Mr. Martinez that we just saw on the videotape.
That's correct.
Okay.
That's correct. And we feel that that is extremely important. Our concern is with the children who are currently at St. Anthony's right now, and our concern is with the parents of children at St. Anthony's. And we feel that the public has a right to be assured that the practices, the unconstitutional practices, which were cited in Mr. Martinez's report and Mr. Lund's report and in Mr. McDonald's report, to assure the public that those practices have terminated and that they won't reoccur in the months to follow.
Ms. Bowman, you've said that those practices have stopped. How do we know without what Ms. Jameson and Mr. Martinez are both asking for?
I guess I'm asking you to trust me. But one of the things that I have said continuously and repeatedly, both on this program before and in the newspaper and in the media, is that we intend to accept the recommendations from the Citizens Committee. The Citizens Committee took into consideration the reports by Mr. Martinez, Mr. Lund, and Mr. McDonald. And the Citizens Committee report made several recommendations that we fully intend to implement. As a matter of fact, many of those recommendations have already been begun to be implemented. For instance, one of the recommendations was the reduction of the census, and that has been continuously being done, and we have reduced the census at YSC. Another one of the very interesting and important recommendations was the addition of the capacity of a juvenile diagnostic unit to be added, because at the present time we don't have a very big capacity, and that every person who was committed to St. Anthony should be diagnosed. That I included. I had to go back into my budget and include that in my budget for the next legislative session. So, I mean, those are a couple of examples of firm, very positive ways that we are moving. I have also told...
well, let me just interrupt for just a second and let Ms. Jameson, isn't that at least evidence of not only action but good faith on the part of the department?
Well, we are pleased in large part with the Citizens Committee report, and we are today asking the department to promptly implement and to give us assurances that they will implement all the recommendations in the report as soon as is practical. We want and are seeking assurances from the department that all status offenders will be immediately removed from the facility. Status offenders are children who basically have not committed any type of criminal activity. We want assurance.
They've run away from home, or they've done something that for the rest of us wouldn't be considered a crime.
Right. If you were an adult, you would not be incarcerated or locked up for that type of activity.
Well, I take it if you say you're asking for that assurance, you didn't get it during the course of your meetings to this point today.
That's correct.
Why not, Ms. Bowman?
I disagree with that statement. We passed out to her a policy that stated that this was a procedure for juveniles to be admitted to St. Anthony's, and it very clearly said that they had to be non-status offenders. In other words, we're not accepting status offenders. So I think that's one arena that that we are moving in. I also want to articulate the fact that we want to look at the entire juvenile justice system in the state of Idaho. St. Anthony is really the effect of what's happening in the entire system. We're having people placed there and have been having juveniles placed there inappropriately. That is why we were able to reduce the census as we have been. And what we have asked is for the Idaho Youth Commission, as an outside third party, so to speak, and is made up of a very divergent, representative Idaho group of people, to take a look at the juvenile justice system. And within that, of course, St. Anthony is part of that. And to then cure this from the ground up. Saying that St. Anthony is the only problem with the juvenile justice system is not really accurate. St. Anthony is the effect of the juvenile justice system. It would be like giving cough medicine for a case of pneumonia if we just looked at that part of it. We need to have the cooperation of the entire juvenile justice system.
Isn't she right about that?
Oh, I think she's absolutely correct about that, and we're very pleased with the department's commitment to do a statewide plan to look at the whole juvenile justice system in the state of Idaho. Our point is...
But that doesn't necessarily address your concerns at St. Anthony.
We feel that we just can't turn our backs on St. Anthony's, that while we need to go ahead with the statewide plan and are extremely supportive of that, we also feel that we need to complete the evaluation that was only just begun of St. Anthony's. There's still many children who are locked up at St. Anthony's, and the purpose of sending children to St. Anthony's is rehabilitation. They're still children, and hopefully we're still trying to help and rehabilitate those children. And the Citizens Committee report and the experts that the Citizens Committee hired all stated that there have been constitutional problems, real abusive problems at St. Anthony's. I think there's consensus on that. And our position is that we simply follow through, have an independent evaluation, finish the independent evaluation, and assure the public and all of us that those abusive practices and the lack of programming, which has really been characteristic of St. Anthony's, that all that be terminated, and that we can all be rest assured that in 4 months, 6 months, 2 years, when we all go home and have different jobs, that children will be afforded humane and proper treatment at St. Anthony's. And without an independent evaluation, we simply don't have those assurances.
Ms. Bowman, I'm a trusting fellow and I'm inclined to trust you, but isn't it a fact that there continues to be controversy here? Wouldn't what she suggests be a good idea, just to clear up the controversy, to sort of put this behind you?
What we want to do is to look at the whole system and not just focus on one part of it. And that I'm as interested in the humane treatment of juveniles as anyone is. I'm not only the Director of Health and Welfare, I have children of my own. I certainly am concerned with how children are treated. And anything that is outside of humane treatment, I am more than concerned with. So I don't like to be characterized as thinking that I have put that aside and I'm looking at something else. I'm very concerned. I'm looking at St. Anthony's every day. However, I want it to be looked at in the concept of the whole state. We can't do anything about St. Anthony's if the judicial system doesn't buy into the whole system, if the legislature doesn't have some action in it, and we all agree and come to terms with this kind of comprehensive juvenile justice system in the state of Idaho. I certainly am doing everything I can with all the resources I have to move in the programmatic areas. As a matter of fact, for the last 2 weeks, the social services directors have been meeting, scheduling the kinds of services that are needed for youth in the state of Idaho. I am very supportive of community services. That's where I think that youth can be best served. We have plotted out a plan. We have even found some money to get to the communities almost immediately so that we can get some kind of foster care that is needed immediately. We are moving. I think the problem comes down to what I said at the beginning, communication. What I need to do is put this in writing for Ms. Jameson so that she maybe can feel more at ease with what is going on in the state.
Ms. Jameson, let me take you in a slightly different direction in the time that remains. What got the headlines in this state were the newspaper and television stories about youngsters shackled to beds. We heard the references to the sitting chair and standing wall earlier. Those sorts of examples of, some would say, physical abuse. Are you confident that those things are not now taking place at St. Anthony?
I'm not confident that those things aren't taking place. I do think that there have been improvements at St. Anthony's. I spent a week at St. Anthony's the end of July and interviewed the majority of children who are housed at St. Anthony's. And there have been improvements, and there needs to be much greater improvements. What I saw were more children, now that standing wall and sitting chair have been, are in the process of being eliminated, more and more children are being placed in isolation, which is a secure lockup in a small room. And I was very concerned about that. I was concerned about the handicapped children who are placed there. I interviewed a deaf boy who was incarcerated at St. Anthony's who apparently was unable to communicate with anyone. He communicated in sign language, and I was very concerned about him. I interviewed a girl who was in isolation for over 60 days in a row at St. Anthony's. There are still problems there, and that's why we feel so strongly that there needs to be continued the independent evaluation of the facility so that we can all be assured that the department is on the road to eliminating those abusive practices, because I don't think we're there right now.
Ms. Bowman?
I would like to, as an example, explain something that Ms. Jameson brought up. She referred to a girl who was in isolation for 60 days. I would like to describe to you what the girl was in. It was a separation. She was the only female serious juvenile offender who was at St. Anthony's at the time. In order to separate her from the other girls, because for the good of the other girls, plus she was a serious juvenile offender, the only female, she was put into an area that was separated from the other girls. Within that area, there was a bedroom with a door on it, with a bed and a desk and a window. The door to that room during the day was left open. The whole area was probably,
So you're saying it's not a cinder block cell with a bed and no sheet on the bed?
I just want to make that as an example of communication problems and semantics and that kind of thing.
I don't have time to go back and forth on that one, but let me just ask you both very quickly. Hanging over all of this, and certainly the comments from Mr. McDonald and Mr. Martinez earlier, were the threats of litigation and the state being in a very tenuous position in terms of lawsuits. Are you worried about that?
I am worried about the humane treatment of juveniles in the state of Idaho, and I'm doing my best for current, present, and future to see that that does not happen in this state.
Are you, litigation, is that still hanging over all of this?
Well,
I'll ask the lawyer.
I think we heard from Mr. McDonald that there are issues of constitutional violations at the institution, and we are also concerned that children are treated in a humane manner, and hopefully we won't have to litigate.
Maybe. Ms. Bowman, Ms. Jameson, we thank you for joining us tonight. We appreciate it very much.
Thank you.
That's our time for tonight. We'll be back tomorrow. I'm Mark Johnson. Good night.
The funding for this program is provided by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting and the Friends of 4, 10, and 12.